She stood quietly at the edge of the gravel clearing, arms folded, eyes taking in the line of tactical ropes and muddy trails ahead. The others had already noticed her. Her faded windbreaker, the old canvas bag, the kind of shoes no one brought to an elite FBI training camp. Someone behind her leaned toward a buddy and muttered that she must have wandered in from a nearby trail, maybe looking for the restroom. The instructors hadn't addressed her directly. They looked past her, calling out names and assigning partners like she didn't belong. She wasn't picked for a team. She wasn't even acknowledged, just left standing there the way weeds get ignored in a flower bed. No one cared to ask why she was here, and no one expected her to last. The first challenge was a simulated bomb scenario. The trainees circled a metal case linked to tripwire sensors, a mock-up meant to test split-second thinking and composure. One by one, they tried to disarm it and failed. Some misread the code, others triggered the alarm. Then, without a word, she stepped forward. They scoffed, rolled their eyes, stepped back just far enough to watch her fail too. But she didn't. In less than a minute, the timer was dead and the case was silent. She stood, brushed the dirt from her knee, and turned away without a word. Every eye followed her as if seeing her for the first time. Olivia Harper wasn't the type of woman who turned heads. At 42, she carried herself with quiet ease, the kind that only comes from years of being unnoticed. Her windbreaker was faded blue, zipped up halfway against the chilly Maine morning, and her jeans were worn at the knees as if they had stories of their own. She didn't walk with purpose so much as she walked with patience. Every step she took seemed deliberate, not because she wanted to stand out, but because she was used to being overlooked. Her hair, streaked with gray, was pulled into a quick bun that had come loose before breakfast and never got fixed. Olivia had grown up in a town where the stop signs outnumbered the people. Her parents owned a tiny hardware store, and she spent summers restocking shelves and winters chasing heat leaks in the attic. By 23, she was married. By 28, she was raising 2 boys alone, while her husband deployed overseas. Life didn't make her hard. It just made her practical. She learned early that no one was coming to rescue her, so she became the kind of person who never waited. When the water heater exploded during a snowstorm, she didn't call for help. She patched it with duct tape, boiled pots on the stove, and got the boys through the night with warm towels and stories about outer space. When her boys were older, she remarried. Her second husband was gentle and solid, a man who taught defensive strategy at a state academy. He never raised his voice and always listened. It was he who encouraged her to sign up for the FBI's civilian leadership program. She told him it sounded ridiculous. He said not for someone like her. Most of the others at the training camp wore sleek black vests, name tags, and mirrored sunglasses. Olivia brought a thermos of chamomile tea and a notebook she had already scribbled in. When they lined up for roll call, she stood at the back. She didn't try to squeeze forward. She had long ago learned that the loudest voice doesn't always know the most. People noticed her, but not in a way she'd ever wanted. They stared when she tied her hair with a rubber band from her wrist. They rolled their eyes when she asked if there was time for a quick walk before drills began. She didn't ask again. Olivia had never set foot inside a federal facility before. She had watched crime dramas and documentaries, but her real experience with crisis came from things like flooded basements and lost insurance cards. She knew how to calm someone down with her voice, how to find solutions when phones didn't work, and how to read a person's fear by how they touched their face. She didn't believe in showing off. She believed in showing up. That's why she was here. Not to impress anyone, not to prove a point, just to see if she could. Some people climbed mountains. Olivia Harper signed up for this, and even though she had to take a bus sleep in a shared tent and eat dehydrated rice from foil packets, she never once thought about leaving. She looked at the challenges the way she looked at everything else, with the kind of quiet grit that can outlast a storm. The camp sat deep in the forest, tucked between steep ridges and clusters of pine trees that blocked out half the sky. Mud clung to every step, thick and wet, soaking into boots within minutes. The air had a bite to it, sharp and uninviting, with a wind that kept finding new ways to slip past layers of clothing. Metal poles held up long canvas tents, their flaps snapping in the cold. Smoke from a makeshift fire pit drifted through the trees, mixing with the smell of wet earth and steel. The only paths were carved by boots, each trail lined with red tape and warning signs for mock explosives. Obstacles rose out of the ground like traps from a forgotten war zone. There were climbing ropes slick with rain-rusted ladders bolted to uneven wooden walls and trenches filled with freezing water. Camouflage nets fluttered above dummy targets, each one wired to sensors and flashing lights. Fake firearms lay stacked in crates marked with faded numbers. They looked real enough to make your heart skip. Instructors barked orders over radios while small groups of trainees ran through timed scenarios with practiced intensity. The drills didn't leave much room for error. Everything was fast, aggressive, and precise, the kind of place where hesitation meant failure. This wasn't a camp for casual curiosity. It was built for people who had already seen something, people who knew what fear smelled like when it was real. Among them, Olivia looked like she had wandered into the wrong story. She moved, slower eyes scanning instead of rushing. Her gear didn't match, her steps didn't echo with the same hard confidence. Where the others towered over the space, she seemed to move through it like a shadow looking for cover. No one said it out loud, but it hung in the air. This wasn't her world, not by the rules they were playing by. They noticed her the second morning roll call started. While most of them wore tactical fleece and combat boots, Olivia stood in a soft flannel shirt and the same hiking shoes she'd arrived in. Her name was called last, and even then the instructor's voice dropped as if unsure why it was on the list. When it came time to split into groups for the navigation drill, no one stepped toward her. They shuffled closer to each other, making tight circles of familiarity. Olivia stood to the side with her hands in her pockets, pretending to check the map no one had given her. The whispers started after the second run. Some laughed quietly when she tripped over a loose rope or paused too long at a signal station. One trainee with a trimmed beard and polished gloves leaned toward another and asked if she was here to audit the course for a wellness blog. It wasn't the words that stung. It was the way no one bothered to hide their smirks. Mason saw it all and didn't stop it. If anything, he added fuel. He made a point of singling her out, asking her loudly how her joints were holding up and whether she needed a seat cushion during tactical briefings. He called her Miss Maine once, just loud enough to make the others snort. During gear checks, someone slipped a bright pink yoga band into her duffel. She found it later and said nothing, just folded it and placed it beside her socks like it belonged. When teams were picked for the scenario run, she was left again. Mason said they had an odd number and shrugged. She nodded and walked the perimeter alone while the others reviewed formations and radio codes. By lunch, a kind of silent wall had been built around her. It wasn't hatred. It was dismissal, the kind that leaves no bruise but never stops hurting. Mason called her name with a smirk that made it clear this wasn't a compliment. The climbing wall stood tall and slick from last night's rain, with ropes hanging like wet vines. Others had gone earlier in pairs, coached through each grip and footstep. Olivia was sent alone. She reached for the first hold and slipped almost immediately. A few chuckles rose from the group, low but sharp enough to cut. She didn't look back, just wiped her palms on her pants and tried again. This time she made it up halfway before her foot gave out, and she dropped, landing hard on the mat. Mason clapped once and asked if she needed a break for tea. A few of the trainees laughed openly now, one of them whispering something about early retirement plans. Olivia stood, adjusted her belt, and walked back to the wall. She didn't make it to the top, not that day, but she tried until time ran out. She nodded at the instructor and walked off without waiting to hear the score. Her legs trembled, but her face didn't show it. Next was the navigation course. Heavy packs, sparse markers, and a 3-hour limit. Mason assigned her a section through the densest terrain, thick with bramble and steep drops. No GPS, just compass and instinct. One guy said she'd probably call her husband to pick her up halfway through. By the time she came back, dirt on her face and burrs clinging to her sleeves, they were already packing up. She was late, but she'd finished. Mason raised an eyebrow and logged her time without a word. The final blow came with the decoding drill, a simulated threat analysis with live updates and encrypted chatter, the kind used to test analytical speed under pressure. Mason said she might want to sit this one out. Olivia took the headset and started reading. Halfway through, she paused. Someone said she must have frozen, but then she began typing again, faster than before. When her time was up, Mason didn't comment. He just looked at the screen a little too long. No one clapped. No one said good job. But she had made it through everything he'd thrown at her. She never raised her voice, never argued, just kept moving forward one quiet step at a time. And while the others still saw her as a joke, something inside her had begun to settle, like the slow gathering of a storm. Olivia never raised her voice, not when Mason mocked her, not when her teammates rolled their eyes, not even when her name was skipped during debriefs. She just listened, nodded once and moved on with a steadiness that didn't need defending. She remembered nights in her old kitchen trying to stretch groceries through the week while her husband was deployed. The boys would fight over cereal, and she'd keep her voice low, always calm, always firm. When a winter storm knocked out power, and one of them slipped on the stairs and gashed his leg, she didn't panic. She wrapped him in towels, lit candles, and pulled out a first aid manual she barely remembered owning. Those years had shaped her, not with anger, but with a kind of endurance that most people didn't see unless they looked close. Out here in the cold mud and static-filled radios, she recognized that same kind of testing. Not loud, not flashy, just steady resistance to giving up. On the second night, a challenge was introduced without warning. A long-distance night hike across unstable terrain using only instinct and a small, flickering flashlight. Most groaned. Olivia pulled her jacket tighter and stepped into the dark without a sound. She came back second. Not first, but ahead of more than half the group, including two who'd taken wrong turns and had to be guided back. Her clothes were soaked. Her lips were blue. She didn't say a word, just handed in her marker and went to dry off. When the medical trainer fainted in the cold the next morning, Olivia was the one kneeling beside him. She checked his pulse, elevated his legs, and covered him with her own coat. Someone asked where she learned to do that. She just smiled and said nothing. People began to watch her differently after that. Not with admiration, not yet, but with less noise in their eyes. Her strength didn't need a spotlight. It worked in silence, one decision at a time, until it couldn't be ignored anymore. The fire crackled low as the group settled into silence, steam rising from tin mugs and breath curling in the cold air. Olivia sat a little apart, not out of shyness, but habit. The warmth of the flames didn't reach her hands, but she didn't move closer. She stared into the glowing wood, listening to the pop of sap and the faint rustling of tents. In her mind, her father's voice came back like it always did when things got heavy. Respect isn't given. It's earned in silence. He used to say that while fixing fence posts or patching leaks with his bare hands, and she'd sit cross-legged nearby memorizing him. She remembered being 29, soaked in sweat in a freezing basement, trying to fix the water pump with a flashlight tucked in her mouth and two hungry kids upstairs waiting for dinner. She hadn't cried, not even when the wrench slipped and split her knuckle. She'd kept working, wrapped her hand in duct tape and finished the job with one good arm. Later, when a stranger showed up in their backyard talking too loud and too close, she didn't hesitate. She stood between him and her sons, holding a rake like a weapon, voice calm but final. He left. Her knees shook after, but not until she'd locked the door and tucked the boys into bed. These weren't stories she told. They lived under her skin like muscle memory. They showed up in quiet ways, like now when a younger trainee cut his hand on a rusted nail during shelter drills and everyone else just stared. Olivia pulled out a tiny kit from her bag, cleaned the wound, and stitched it closed in 5 tight passes. He winced, but didn't pull away. When she was done, he asked if she used to be a nurse. She shook her head. Just a mother who had to learn things. Later that night, someone handed her a cup of hot tea without a word. She nodded, grateful but not surprised. Things were shifting slowly, like ice beginning to crack under a heavy sky. Mason didn't like it. The next morning, he assigned her to carry a full pack, twice the weight of the others. Said it was a test of grit. Olivia didn't argue. She adjusted the straps, bent her knees, and started walking. She didn't complain when her shoulders ached or her breath came in shallow bursts. She didn't stop when the path turned steep. She just kept going, eyes forward, boots sinking into the mud but never slipping. By the end of the day, no one laughed when she passed them. They didn't cheer either. They just watched quiet now, as if unsure where they stood. Something in her presence had begun to take root. Not in big moments, but in the spaces between them. She never asked for respect, but one by one it began to show up. Not through applause, through silence. The kind that meant they finally saw her. And Mason, watching from the side with his arms crossed too tight, knew he was losing the story he thought he was writing. The final day brought the toughest drill. A hostage scenario inside a mock structure with multiple entry points, time pressure, and a live radio feed mimicking real field chatter. No one had passed it yet. Every team had either missed a critical cue or tripped a wire that ended the simulation with a deafening alarm. Mason stood at the front with the clipboard calling names with the usual edge in his voice. He paused halfway through the list, looked around, and then said, "Hers. Olivia. Just her. No team. No partner." A few heads turned. Someone muttered that this was going to be quick. She didn't ask why. She didn't flinch. She just stepped forward, calm and deliberate, and took the headset from his hand without looking him in the eye. The command tent quieted. Even the instructors shifted slightly. She walked through the tape-marked entrance, slow but steady eyes scanning the layout. Her breath was controlled. She ignored the fake gunfire sounds and the rapid-fire audio meant to throw her off. Instead, she moved with purpose, like she already knew what each sound meant. 30 seconds in, she reached the central zone. She paused, once tapped her earpiece, and rerouted. Everyone outside blinked. The change wasn't part of the expected solution. But no one stopped her. She reached the simulated hostage room, ran a fast perimeter check, then placed a signal marker exactly where the model showed. The silent alarm would be buried. She neutralized the threat, cleared the room, and returned to the exit. The timer stopped. 1 minute, 43 seconds. No errors, no alerts. Complete success. No one said a word. Mason stared at the screen, jaw tight. One of the other instructors leaned in, muttering something under his breath, eyes wide. Olivia stood quietly at the edge of the structure, hands still gloved, breathing steady. The silence felt louder than any applause. It wasn't just that she had done it. It was how she had done it. Not with luck, not by chance, but with a calm confidence that didn't ask for permission to exist. People looked at her now like she had changed shape. But she hadn't. They just finally saw what had always been there. Not in her height or voice or gear, in how she moved, how she read the world like it spoke in her language. Before anyone could speak, a man stepped out from the far tent. He wore a black suit, crisp despite the mud around his polished shoes, and his badge glinted under the overcast sky. No one had seen him arrive, but now all eyes were on him. He moved with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be announced. The trainees stood straighter, unsure if they should salute or speak. Olivia didn't move. She just met his eyes with the same calm she had carried since the first day. He nodded to her once, then turned to the crowd. His voice was clear and even. He said they had witnessed the cleanest run of the scenario to date. He said the exercise wasn't designed to be won. It was built to test reaction under failure. Then he paused, letting the silence settle. He looked at Mason, then back to the rest. He told them Olivia wasn't just here for the program. She wasn't a civilian. She wasn't new. She was the original architect of the curriculum they'd spent the past week struggling through. She had written the manual they had memorized. She had designed the drills they thought were too advanced. She had trained the first generation of this camp's instructors. A breath caught somewhere near the back of the crowd. Someone whispered a curse too soft to hear clearly. Mason didn't speak. His face had lost color, and the clipboard at his side dipped slightly in his hand. The deputy director continued. He said Olivia had been asked to return under observation, not to see if she could keep up, but to evaluate the trainers, to see if the program still held to its original purpose: integrity, instinct, discipline, without ego. She had stayed silent on request. She had let the process speak for itself, and now, with the final drill complete, the evaluation was done. No one moved. Olivia didn't smile or gloat. She simply removed her gloves and tucked them into her pocket. The wind picked up a little, rustling the leaves and the back flap of the tent. Mason finally stepped forward. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He looked at her the way someone looks at a locked door after realizing they left the key inside. She met his stare without anger, just certainty. He dropped his eyes. The others looked at her differently now, not with pity, not with mockery, but with something close to reverence, the kind of respect earned not through titles, but through every quiet decision made under pressure. She didn't ask for attention. She earned it by moving exactly the way she always had, direct, unshaken, stronger than anyone had guessed. And now that they knew the truth, They couldn't unsee it. Mason stood frozen for a long moment after the reveal. The clipboard hung limp in his hand, his knuckles pale against the plastic edge. When he finally moved, it was slow, deliberate, like his body wasn't quite ready to follow through with what his pride was resisting. He stepped toward Olivia, stopping just short of her shadow. His voice, when it came, was low. He said he got it wrong, that he let what he saw cloud what he never tried to understand. He added that it wouldn't happen again. Olivia didn't nod, didn't offer comfort. She simply looked at him, steady and quiet, with the weight of someone who had heard too many apologies too late. The camp was silent behind them. Even the instructors stayed still. Mason searched her face for something, approval maybe, or forgiveness, but she gave him only truth. Lesson 1. Never assume quiet means weak. She turned without waiting for a response. Her boots pressed into the gravel with each step, soft but certain. The wind tugged gently at her jacket as she walked back toward the tents, alone but no longer invisible. Mason didn't follow. He didn't speak again. He just stood there, surrounded by everything he thought he knew, watching it shift around the one person he never saw coming. There was no victory in her voice, just clarity. And that, more than anything, was what stayed with him. I didn't come to the camp to prove anything. I came because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be tested. Not in ways that showed up on paper, but in the kind that made you listen to yourself when everything around you said you didn't belong. People saw my jacket and my shoes and the gray in my hair. They saw what they wanted to see. But real worth doesn't make noise. It doesn't need applause. It's the kind that lives in the quiet work done when no one's watching. I've spent a lot of years in the background, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't feel the need to say it loud. Strength can be silent, steady. It grows in people who hold their ground without needing a spotlight. At camp, I was judged before I even spoke. It hurt, but it also reminded me that perception is a shallow thing. People carry entire worlds you'll never see if you only look at the surface. You don't have to look like someone else to lead. You don't have to speak like them or walk like them or wear the right gear. You just have to know who you are when the test comes. If you've ever been overlooked, I want you to remember this. Respect doesn't always arrive in the moment you deserve it. Sometimes it takes its time, but it always comes to those who keep showing up anyway. The world may not reward quiet people first, but it will notice when they outlast the noise. Olivia walked into the camp as someone they barely noticed. By the end, she hadn't changed her voice, her clothes, or her pace. What changed was the way they saw her, and maybe for some of them the way they would see others from that day forward. Her journey wasn't about proving she was better. It was about showing what strength looks like when it doesn't ask for attention. She didn't lead with volume. She led with presence, with grace, with the kind of quiet that doesn't need to explain itself. This story isn't just hers. It belongs to anyone who's been misjudged, overlooked, or told they weren't enough. To those who keep showing up anyway, not to prove the world wrong, but because they know who they are, even when no one's looking. If Olivia's story spoke to something inside you, pass it along. Maybe someone in your life needs to be reminded that quiet strength is still strength, and that sometimes the people we ignore the fastest are the ones we learn from the most. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And if this story meant something to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today.